Hey everyone, welcome to the 255th episode of the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's co-host,
Chris Albrecht of the Spoon.tech.
That's right. Everyone, Kevin has the flu. It is tragic and sad, but he will be back. And in the meantime, I have my good friend, Chris Albrecht, who is, like he said, editor-in-chief over at the food tech site, The Spoon. So, of course, we're going to sprinkle a little food love in here, but we're going to hit the main topics that even Kevin and I would hit. So, Chris, thanks so much for doing this.
Thank you for having me.
It's going to be great. So, this week, we are going to be talking about, the FTC bombshell. It's going back 10 years looking at small acquisitions. We'll talk about that. Plus, the approval for the T-Mobile Sprint acquisition, what that means for IoT. NIST is calling for two-factor authentication. About time. ARM has new edge chips for the IoT. We've got news bits from LifeX, Tuya, and Chris is going to tell us about a fancy kitchen gadget that he is loving. And our guest this week is Naomi Lefkowitz, who is from NIST. She's the person who is behind NIST's new privacy framework, so we're going to ask her all about that and how to build privacy-focused devices. We're also going to hear from our sponsors, DigiCert and Very. So, before we get into it, let's hear from Very. Are you looking for an IoT development team who's been there, done that? Very's award-winning, full-service IoT development firm will work with you to deliver your IoT solution on time and on budget. Learn more at www.verypossible.com. That's www.verypossible.com. Okay, Chris, let's get started with the FTC, the Federal Trade Commission. This was Tuesday afternoon, and all of a sudden it said, hey, bunches of companies, Alphabet, Amazon, Apple, Facebook, and kind of a surprise, Microsoft. Basically, we're going to need to look at the last 10 years of your acquisitions and make sure they weren't used to stifle competition in the market, which kind of scary. I don't know. Did you have a take when you saw this?
Well, I want to hear yours first. So why is scary the first word that you use?
Well, one, because we've been talking for a good year or so about tech is too big. And we haven't really heard a lot of convincing arguments about how the FTC could handle breaking apart the tech firms. And going after a decade's worth of M&A activity feels pretty scary, because what if how would you undo those acquisitions? Would you just fine people? Would you fine the companies because of it? Would you seek to pull out the technology, the people? I mean, in some cases, these are acqui-hires and everybody has moved on. So I find it scary because it feels like that is going way far back. And what are you going to do if you find out this was a problem?
My first reaction in this was, given the administration we're currently under, which is a bit vindictive, I was like, well, what do they want to dig up and why? Now, I realize that is a very sort of paranoid approach. But to your point, what are they going to do if something how do you extricate a deal from 2010 or 2011? It just seems like such a ready, shoot, aim kind of approach to this. I don't know what exactly, what do they do to your point, what do they do if they find something? How much time and energy and resources are going to be put into this? And how much then now companies do they have to devote to fulfilling any kind of requests for information or anything like that? I mean, I don't know. I'm all for transparency. I know there's a broader discussion to be had around the tech world and the tech world being too big, but it seems like, wow, 2010, a lot has changed since 2010.
I know. We were just getting LTE networks and we had the iPhone, but we just got the iPad. And now we don't really care about it. So a few details. One, this is going to focus primarily on smaller deals. And these are deals that are less than $500 million because those don't typically trigger an FTC investigation. So this isn't things like, hey, Google or Alphabet has announced that it wants to buy Fitbit. that's a pending deal, not something that would go under scrutiny under this particular thing. But it's all these smaller deals. They're also going to be looking at deals that the acquisitions were shuttered after the purchase. So this brought to mind, actually, Google, through its Nest division, bought a company called Revolve way back in like 2016. Revolve was a smart home hub, and it made one of the first hubs that had Zigbee and Z-Wave and Bluetooth and Wi-Fi. It was lovely. Everyone was excited about it. When Google bought it, they shut it down. I'm imagining they shut it down because they didn't want to have to deal with like the extra engineering staff. But the question is, did that hurt competition in this space? You might say it did, because it made it much more difficult. It made hubs harder to, I guess, purchase, and it made it a less viable business option. But other deals that I think would be, I don't want to say worth scrutinizing, but are of interest to our audience. Google has purchased a couple companies other than Revolve that feel kind of like they're in the IoT space. They bought a company called Thrive Audio that does surround sound. I'm wondering if we're seeing that in the Google Max.
Yeah.
They've purchased a bunch of image recognition and computer vision companies that those are kind of hard to say because, are they buying an algorithm? Are they buying just smart people? My hunch says smart people, so I don't know how anti-competitive that is. They bought a company called Chronologics. That's a smartwatches company that we've never really heard from ever again. So they've done some health acquisitions.
They bought a company called Synosis a while back, a couple years back, that used phones for like health monitoring stuff. That company was in the process of getting their funding before Google came in and got them. So, but the other one is just like, you think about Apple. Apple always makes those like, oh, hey, we bought this, these very stealthy acquisitions that you don't hear about until somebody digs up something.
Yeah, they actually just completed one called Exynor.ai. And Exynor was the back-end software that provided motion detection in our Wyze cameras that we all know and love. So Apple did that, and the assumption is they're going to use Exynor's technology, which is edge-based image recognition on a battery-powered or a low-powered device. So think about if Apple can do image recognition without sucking the juice on your smartphone or on maybe their own cameras. So would something like that count? Apple also bought a company called Beddit, and Beddit is where I think a lot of the sleep tracking technology that we're going to see coming out in the Apple Watch is coming from, with sleep apnea detection, that sort of thing. Silk Labs is another one. Silk Labs is a company that was making a smart home hub and entire ecosystem. So it was a little stealthy, so we're not 100% sure. They also had like some really beautiful hardware.
The bigger point still stands. I mean, I don't know. I mean, I guess if you're looking for a pattern of behavior, but the competitive landscape of 2010 is just so hard to even remember right now. Like it was the iPhone 4, I think, at that point. It's so hard to go back in time to then.
From an IoT perspective, we didn't have Nest. Nest launched in 2011. It was purchased by Google in a review deal that would not be part of this overview. It was purchased by Google in 2014.
Were there any connected lights? Like you didn't have Ring?
No. Hue didn't come out until like 2011. Wemo was out in 2011. Like 2011's we started seeing a lot of connected home products just starting to hit the market.
Yeah.
So, and on all this AI nonsense that we talk about all the time now, that was nowhere. Nowhere. This was before we were like doing amazing things in that department. So this will be worth watching. We'll see what happens and stay tuned because I'm sure we're going to keep talking about it for the next couple months. The FTC didn't just like freak out the entire tech ecosystem with this other announcement. They also said that they would approve the T-Mobile Sprint deal. This was actually not just the FTC. This was a judge that said, yeah, let's just go ahead and do it. The FTC actually was a little like, I don't know if we're going to do this. So this is going to turn the number 3 and number 4 carrier into just the number 3 carrier. From the IoT perspective, it's worth noting that T-Mobile and Sprint both had NB-IoT networks. Sprint's is a little bigger. Sprint does have a fully functioning IoT platform. And by that, I mean, you could go to Sprint and buy any number of connected devices that were already on their network that you could use, like sensors and that sort of thing, plug them in, and then use their cloud backend to like monitor that. So if you were a small business and you're like, oh, I need some temperature sensors for my fridges, you could just buy it, plop them all in there, and Sprint took care of everything. You just pay them. So I don't really think, other than more spectrum, probably higher bills eventually. No, this is going to affect consumers more than it will the business customers.
Is there anything, I was going to say, if there's like an industrial IoT angle to this, like I'm squarely on the consumer end. I don't have T-Mobile or Sprint, so honestly, it doesn't impact me directly. I know it does in a broader, like existential way, but is there anything on the industrial side that you know about that they're doing?
In areas where they have service, there are corporate customers. It's not industrial so much as it's enterprise. There may be an opportunity or a challenge to companies who are reselling their service. So like companies like Particle or other IoT module vendors might contract with these guys to provide the service on the back end. They might see their rates rise, but not really. This is kind of like a nothing burger deal from the IoT perspective.
Yeah.
But in really exciting news,
woohoo!
Y'all, NIST has enabled two-factor authentication. And by enabled, I mean they are forcing it on you. Oh, we have been talking about this because we think it's really important for things like cameras and, yeah, even thermostats that have control of your house. Having two-factor is important. And by two-factor, we're talking about you have a password that gets you into your account in the app, but you're also going to have to, when you log in, not maybe every time, but some of the time, you're going to have to log in with a secondary code that comes from either a text, or maybe it will come from Authenticator app on your phone or something else.
Can you walk me through how this would work, right? So I'm just trying to think about if I'm controlling something with my phone. I recognize the importance of like two-factor authentication. I'm a big believer in it, and it's surprising that it has taken this long for something like this. But do you have a sense of what it will be? What will it be? How it will be integrated in sort of the workflow and how you control your IoT stuff?
Sure. So my hunch, and I'm not 100% sure this is how it's going to work. I don't think that they're going to force you every time you try to log in to change the thermostat. I don't think they're going to force you to give your authentication code, right?
Yeah.
My hunch is they'll either make it like every 3 months. You'll have to, I know Ring has you do it I think it's 2 or 3 months. You have to log in. In NIST, if you are a new login, they're going to have a verification code that goes to your email. And if you can't do that, you can't log into your account.
So they're going to have to balance sort of security with usability.
Yeah, which is always the hard thing. But what this does is for everybody out there who reuses their passwords, I know you're out there.
What's wrong with you?
I used to do that too.
You did?
Before I got a password manager.
I'm quietly judging you.
You are actually audibly judging me, but that's okay. I accept it. I was wrong, but I have changed and reformed. And this is especially important, I'm going to tell you, for cameras. The big Ring quote unquote hack was because people reused their passwords. And then when those passwords were compromised, people went in and said, oh, let's see which of these 3 million passwords we have. Let's see which of these people have Ring accounts. And then maybe we can terrorize their children.
That happened to a guy that I met here at a party. He was saying that someone started talking to him through his security camera. And I can't remember if it was Ring.
It also happened to NIST. So
they had it set up and somebody in France or somebody started talking to them.
Yeah. Oh, oui.
Bien sûr.
All right. So NIST is going.
Wait, but let me ask you this real quick. Like, do you think this will spur on other people? Will this create the wave of adoption that you're looking for, do you think?
I hope so for certain devices. And I said, and I wonder if this is a result of California. California, as of January, basically is saying they have a device security law that says companies have to provide appropriate security for the type of data that can be gleaned from their device. So for a camera that's inside, they probably want higher levels of security. So NIST may be reacting actually to that, to be proactively saying, all right, this needs a higher level of security than just a password, especially since we know people reuse their passwords. So let's force people to do two-factor. I also think if this becomes standard across the industry, we're going to see more convenient and easier ways to do two-factor so it won't be quite such a pain in the butt. Like
Yeah.
with Nest sending you an email, that's all right. That's not the worst thing that can happen. I always get frustrated when, you've got to find your RSA key, log it,
Would Face ID do it?
So Face ID is a really interesting one. It could work. Yes. Because that is that is another way to make sure that you're you. And so those are the kind of things that I think would be really compelling going forward. Maybe even voice match.
Yeah. I mean, Face ID is so quick. Any app that I have that uses it, like, it is not an inconvenience at all.
Right. I think, yes, we're going to see more companies roll this out, pushed by both the market and by laws. But I also think as that happens, companies are going to invest in making it easier. So that could be good. All right. Are you ready to talk about chips?
I'm just going to go out and get a snack while you go ahead and chip it up.
That is fair. So ARM, they launched this week 2 new designs. And ARM, as you guys are probably familiar, they are a chip licensing firm. So they license architectures for chips. And they're super popular in the Internet of Things because they work really well at doing a lot of processing at low power consumption. So what ARM has done is they've created 2 new chips for edge IoT, specifically AI at the edge. Woo!
Yay!
All those fancy words basically mean these are 2 designs that will let you do machine learning, just the inference, not the actual learning at the edge. And this will be good for things like image recognition. ARM talked to people about building a cane for someone that can detect falls or maybe can detect things, like see things that are in the way. So it would vibrate to alert someone that, by the way, there's a curb here. Or, by the way, there's a tiny Lego on the floor that's going to cause you immense pain. All of those things. The first design is the Cortex M55. That is traditional ARM technology. And then they created an entirely new architecture called the Ethos U55. And that is actually going to be like a neural network coprocessor. So all that's going to do is any sort of neural network work. So that could be the convolutional neural networks that we use for computer vision. It could be like the long-term, short-term networks or the recurrent neural networks that we use to teach things like how to play video games. So all of that's going to be out there. Companies are going to be licensing it as of now, and we won't see it in products until about 2021.
I think this is a trend, obviously, that, I mean, you know about this, like moving everything, pushing the stuff to the edge. We were talking before about a company at The Spoon. We cover just food and technology and sort of the convergence of those two things. But a company called Sensory, and I'll never forget them because they sent out their release on Christmas Eve. Which I thought was, yes, it was, and it was embargoed. So I wrote it up and then released it on Christmas Eve, which was happy for me because then I had a story that was up on Christmas Eve. But like they created a voice assistant on the edge. And part of the appeal with this stuff is sort of the privacy consideration, and things aren't being beamed back to the cloud, right? Like you can have all this stuff at the edge. And because I don't cover it as much, this may be a dumb question, but just asking, like, are you seeing this AI pushing to the edges, so like in all of the devices that are coming out, or what are you seeing in terms of that?
There's actually kind of an interesting bifurcation happening. So Google is like local, and they're doing it less so for privacy, more for latency, but it is nice for privacy perspective. Apple is doing it for privacy perspective. Meanwhile, Amazon isn't really pushing very much to the edge so far, or hasn't talked about it. So yes, I am seeing that. It is hugely important, and 100%, we're totally going to see more of it. So, and the cool thing about these chips is that they're actually really powerful. So you're going to be able to do things that you haven't been able to do before, which is like the story of silicon, but it's worth mentioning that like with good silicon comes amazing possibilities. That's all on chips.
Chip Corner.
Okay, let's talk about quick news bits. Very fun stuff. Tuya, which is a Chinese IoT platform. They're behind a lot of big name brands. They are actually announcing an NB-IoT module. NB-IoT is a low power wide area networking technology. It's cellular. And Tuya's module is going to be certified for Europe, North America, and Asia. So it's going to have all the approvals. It'll work everywhere. And you can buy one module and stick it in all of your devices that will be sold then around the world. Yay.
Hooray.
LifeX, the company behind Wi-Fi light bulbs that are brilliantly colored. I feel like that should be a motto, but that's just how I think of them.
I like that you call an advertising tagline a motto. Like this is...
It should be an advertising tagline.
This is our motto as a company. Brilliance should be brilliant.
They're very pretty. They're, quite frankly, I think they're prettier. The colors are prettier than Hue. I'll be honest.
Okay.
But I do have Hues all over my house, and I only have one LifeX bulb. But if you have bought into LifeX, probably because they're Wi-Fi and you didn't need a hub, they are now making a switch. It will be out in March. Right now, it's going to be on sale for $100. This switch is beautiful. I'm just going to tell you, but it is a switch that has to be wired into the wall. And it is kind of expensive compared to the other wired switches out there, but it has 4 programmable switches, so do with that what you will.
It's very minimalist, very sleek.
It is. It's so pretty. I'm probably going to use that as the art for the show notes, so you guys can look for it. Okay. Ooh, there is a new drug in town. No, it's not there yet, but...
Huey Lewis?
No.
Oh.
But there is a company called SmartTab, and they are making a connected pill for Crohn's disease, which it's a GI issue. The cool thing is this pill is connected. It'll connect to your watch or to your phone, and it will disperse its medicine when it's in the right part of your GI tract, which to me is crazy. So it'll tell your phone, it'll be like, I guess, I'm passing through the ileum or the duodenum, and I don't know my biology all that well. So I'm hanging out in one part of one intestine. I should release now, and you'll be like, yes, and it'll do it.
Is it a miniaturized ship with Raquel Welch and a bunch of other guys that has been injected into you? Is that what we're talking about?
We are not talking about that movie. What is that movie?
Fantastic Voyage?
That's it. Fantastic. We are not talking about Fantastic Voyage.
All right. Worth a shot.
That'd be pretty cool. This is not real. You can't buy it yet. They're beginning human studies in 2020. And the goal is to get FDA approval sometime this year or next. But talk about really cool, I think. Okay. Other news. This is for you, Chris. Peekaboo.
Peekaboo. Yeah. So Peekaboo, again, so the Spoon, we cover basically food tech stuff. And Peekaboo is something we've been writing about for a number of years. It's a crowd-funded homebrew appliance, right? So it can fit on your countertop and you can make your own beer with it. And Peekaboo, long story short, was looking for funding. They had a bridge loan and then they were put into receivership. So the company is, the loan was called in and they're being put up for sale. So what's interesting about this is just that they were a crowdfunding. They did a number of projects on Kickstarter and they raised millions of dollars and shipped product. So they were sort of this gold standard in the food world about being able to create a homebrew system that came to market. There were a number of other ones that were funded that never came to market, but now they're being put up for sale. And part of the issue was sort of that they were going in a lot of different directions, but it's sort of what it makes us wonder, what we were talking about today on our own podcast at The Spoon was just, does this mean that there isn't really a market for homebrew, like high-tech homebrew appliances because so many of them are no longer ongoing concerns? Or is it like just this sort of implementation of it? I don't know. Like I've never brewed beer, but the appeal of a device to me is that I don't have to deal with all the buckets and bleaching and, you know, all the sterilization. It seems like if I can just push a button and have it done, then that would be one thing. But maybe the people who like it really like it for that reason and don't want an appliance, and there aren't enough people who want to make their own beer when they can just go to the corner and grab a 6-pack. I don't know. Like,
yeah, I think the resurgence in craft beer, good craft beer in the U.S. may be causing them a problem. How much was the Peekaboo?
They had a bunch of different ones. They had ones. So part of the problem was that they had like the Zymatic. Is that what it's called? That was for small brewers. So it did larger batches. And then they had the Peekaboo C, I think, was the home device. And then they tried to come out with a U, which would do like cold brew coffee and golden milk and all this other stuff. But then they suspended that. And so they had a still at one point. And they were in all what evidently what the guy was told us was just that they had a really complex cap table and that they weren't so far into one market to where a buyer would come in and want to, take over that particular kind of business. And they were all over the place. They even get onto like they have this cask forage product, which ages new like grain spirits overnight or quickly, I should say. So you could create a whiskey in no time flat instead of having to age it for 8 years. If you're a small distillery, you don't have to wait that long until you have a product. So, they were kind of all over the place. It's sad to see. And it's, there's a lesson in there somewhere for someone looking to create their own spirits-based product.
Should I take anything away from like the failure of Juicero, the failure of, let's see, Jewel, which got bought? I think it was kind of a fire sale. Should I take anything out of like the dedicated connected kitchen appliance market?
So I think what you're seeing is that there is sort of a shakeup as the industry matures. So, Jewel had to be, they laid off a bunch of people. They made the sous vide, a connected sous vide device that was beautiful and worked really well. And Namaku is another sous vide appliance that, these were all, you could control it with your phone. But sous videing takes a long time. And people, I think, were enamored of it because it was finally a device where you could do it at home. And, the steak tastes amazing. But like, I don't want to spend 100 minutes putting it in a warm bath and then having to sear it. Right. So you're seeing, and now you're also, there are a bunch of connected ovens, and Brava got bought by Middleby, and they had this high tech oven that worked well. But do you want to spend $1,100 on another oven that sits on your countertop and cooks with light, and you can't even see into it except through a fisheye camera? Right. Like there are, we'll see. So what's going to happen with the June or Tvala? Like, is there enough of, now that the kind of wow tech is there enough of a market there to sustain it over the long haul? Or are they just going to get subsumed into other larger companies and have their tech incorporated into traditional, like more, like wall ovens and refrigerators and stuff like that?
Man, you're going to pry my June out of my cold, dead hands, or they're going to have to turn my June into a cold, dead oven.
I'm right there with you. I've unlocked the Brussels sprouts on the June, and they are like eating candy. It is amazing.
There you go. All right. You, Chris, have a device for us that is not a fancy oven and should, because it's a major brand, maybe be here for a while. But what are you playing with?
So I'm up here in the Pacific Northwest, and it's been cold. It is not typically barbecue season up here, but I've been using this Traeger Wi-Fi connected grill, the Pro 575. The company sent it to me to test it out. It's a Wi-Fi connected pellet smoker. And what's nice about it, I've never smoked a thing in my life because
is it a grill or a smoker?
I think you can use it for a grill because you can turn it up, but it's not like a direct heat kind of thing. Like it is a wood pellet smoker with an auger. It automates everything. But I have cooked like steak on it. I have cooked ribs. I have cooked brisket. There are a number of things. And it comes with, the guy even said I should cook bacon on it because they have this coffee rub for bacon that is supposed to be amazing.
I would like to be there when you do that.
I will invite you over. I've never smoked anything because the idea of spending 9 hours tending to a fire to make sure it's the right temperature for the amount of time just seemed like a nightmare. But this automates everything, and it runs it through an app on my phone, and I can see if the recipe calls for adjusting a temperature at a particular time, I can do it. I can monitor the pellet level in case it runs low. I can set timers or adjust timers or set it for a notification if it hits a certain temperature. And literally, I've just been putting meat on this thing and just letting it sit for hours. And I have not had a bad experience with it yet. I smoked a turkey for Thanksgiving and then ribs over the weekend. And it's just been so nice to have, I can just look at the phone and go like, oh, okay, everything's fine. Probe is still in the thing. It's getting to the right temperature. Everything's working. And it is just, I say that because I am not a good griller. My wife does all the grilling in the house, cooking meat on open, any kind of flame. I usually don't do it, but now I feel like I can.
Okay. And this is a $799.99 device. It's Wi-Fi, and you have to buy the pellets, right?
Yeah, you get the pellet, but you can get those at like a hardware store or even Safeway.
Oh, wow. It has a drivetrain, y'all. I don't even know. Okay. All right. Thank you, Chris. That's awesome, and not something I would try myself. Although I will say I have eaten the ribs I ate at your house were cooked on this thing, right?
Yeah.
In butter. Yeah. They were amazing.
Yeah, they were pretty good.
Yes, and my heart is still going. I can't believe it. Okay, now it is time for the Internet of Things podcast hotline. That's right. This is the section of the show where we take your questions and we attempt to answer them. And if you have a question that you'd like us to answer, give us a call at 512-623-7424. And the nice news is you will be entered to win a prize for our February drawing if you call and leave a message before the end of this month. Yay! I'm not 100% sure what the February drawing prize is, but it's going to be good. You're going to want it, and it's free. Why wouldn't you? Okay. This week's question is from Rebecca. Okay, this week's voicemail is actually an email, which we don't often do, but sometimes we make an exception. So, this week's email is from Rebecca. Hello, I'm a newer listener of your podcast. It's cool. I love my Madam A devices. I have a physical disability and use a power wheelchair, so having the ability to see who's at my door and talk to them via my phone or Echo Spot is really intriguing. I may end up upgrading to a show. Not sure yet. Anyway, I know you've talked a lot about Ring, but with all of the privacy concerns, I'm nervous to try it. What would your recommendation be for a video doorbell that's easy to set up, safe, not easily hackable, and compatible with Echo devices? I've been trying to do research online, but my brain keeps getting overwhelmed because everyone has a different opinion. Thanks so much for your help. Rebecca, you are trying to do something that should be really easy. In practice, it is not. And the reason is Amazon owns Ring. The best way to get the best experience is actually to have both an Amazon Echo Show, and a Ring doorbell. I'm going to tell you, we have talked a lot about Ring. Ring has now, through their privacy control, they've made it easier for you to not respond to police requests for videos if that's something you're worried about. From a security perspective, Ring does get you the option of turning on two-factor authentication. So you should do that, especially, it's an outdoor camera, but if you are worried about people talking to you or looking in on your camera, then this would make sense to do two-factor. I just bought my sister-in-law, a Ring camera or a Ring doorbell. And so I don't think it's terrible if you have the right precautions. So that's going to be your best bet simply because when the doorbell rings, you can set it up so it will pop up on your Echo Show or Echo Spot. And it's fast, it's easy, it works. Now, my favorite doorbell is actually the Nest Hello. And you can use the Nest Hello with your Echo gear. You can actually use other good doorbells like the Eufy or the Remo Plus. The trade-off is when someone rings your doorbell, your Echo Show is not going to be like, hey, someone's at the door. Instead, you're going to hear the doorbell and you're going to have to say, Madam A, show me front doorbell camera or display front doorbell camera. And when Madam A hears that, she's going to wake up. She's going to call for the API, make the API call, try to get to it. There's like 7 to maybe even 20 seconds will pass, and then you will see who's at your door. But that's a long time. So that's kind of your trade-off there that you're looking at. I would encourage you, just because I like the Google system a little bit more, to do a Google Home Hub with some sort of Google Smart Display and a Nest Hello doorbell. If you're not married to the Echo ecosystem. That's my advice to you. That's a seamless and really excellent experience.
I look forward to the musical My Favorite Doorbell to hit Broadway sometime soon.
Dun, 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 dun. And the song is Ding Dong, the cartel is dead. No, the monopoly is dead. Okay. Terrible, terrible. Remember, if you have a question for us, give us a call, 512-623-7424. And that concludes this portion of the Internet of Things podcast. Please stay tuned for our guest, Naomi Lefkowitz of NIST, who is going to be talking about what you need to know from the new privacy framework. And I'm going to give a big thank you to Chris Albrecht for co-hosting the show with us. Thanks, Chris.
Thank you for having me. This was a lot of fun. I really appreciate it and learned a lot.
All right. And now, a message from our sponsor. Hey everyone, we are taking a quick break from the Internet of Things podcast for a message from our sponsor. This week's sponsor is DigiCert, and I have VP of IoT Security, Mike Nelson, here from DigiCert. Today we're talking about low-powered devices and how to secure them. So according to a Juniper research study, service revenue from low-power IoT devices will grow 800% over the next 5 years. That means it's going to exceed $2.6 billion by 2024. This all begs the question, so what are low-powered IoT devices and what kind of applications are they going to be used for?
Yeah, low-powered IoT devices really are devices that have limited computing power. They're deployed in all industries. We see a lot of these low-power devices as really tracking sensors. In the smart city, we see traffic lights, parking stalls, utility sensors. In healthcare, we're seeing some really innovative uses for medication consumption, location tracking for patients, and even devices that track patient vitals from a remote location.
What kind of data are these devices transmitting?
3 types of data. The first is automation data, and that's data that helps facilitate the automation of a decision, such as settings on a thermostat. Status data that tells you the status of something, such as is the light green or is the parking stall open. And the final one is location data, and that tells you the location of something, and that can be a truck on the road, that can be a medical device in a hospital, or a patient that has potentially left a hospital. Those are the 3 types of data that is being generated by them.
That's a lot of data. So how should we think about securing these low-powered devices?
Yeah, so I think the data is the topmost concern for these, and making sure that there's integrity and confidentiality of the data. Governments and businesses and even consumers are consuming this data and using it to make decisions. And so the security and the privacy of that data is really important.
Okay, and how can these devices be protected or secured?
Yeah, so most IoT devices have one of 3 vulnerabilities. The first one is authentication, and that's really about keeping the bad guys out. The second one is about confidentiality and how you handle the data in a secure way. And encryption is the best practice for that. The final one is the integrity of the data and knowing that you can trust the data and that it hasn't been manipulated. And leveraging security best practices like digital signatures and code signing is best practice for ensuring integrity.
Great. And where can our listeners go to find out more about DigiCert and how it secures low-power IoT devices?
Your listeners can go to digicert.com, and we have an entire section on IoT.
Hey everyone, welcome back to the Internet of Things podcast. This is your host, Stacey Higginbotham, and today's guest is Naomi Lefkowitz, who is a senior policy advisor at NIST. Hello, Naomi. How are you today?
Hi, Stacey. I'm great. Thank you for having me.
I always tell people I'm so excited, but in this I really am because NIST released last month a privacy framework, and it's very in-depth. I read it again. I read articles about it, and I was like, it's a lot. So I'm glad to have you on the show to help kind of explain this at a high level for us and maybe go a little deeper on some of the things. So thank you. So this is out. Talk to us about why NIST put out this framework.
So actually, NIST has been working in this area of privacy engineering and risk management for a number of years now. I lead our privacy engineering program, and we've been very interested in the issues of around trustworthiness and how do we make products and services more trustworthy, which, I think traditionally has been sort of thought of as equating trustworthiness and security. And, we see that as adding other characteristics like privacy in terms of how people perceive trustworthiness. But I'd say in the summer of 2018, we started getting inquiries from industry and the administration, given the environment with all this new regulation coming on, like the European GDPR and California law, as well as some major privacy incidents in the news. People were wondering whether, since NIST did such a successful job with the cybersecurity framework, whether we could do something similar for privacy. And so we really set out on that journey and then really thought we would model the process at a minimum after the cybersecurity framework, because we think that open, transparent collaboration with stakeholders, when, we're talking about a voluntary tool, we really need that stakeholder buy-in because it needs to be something valuable that they want to pick up and use. So we thought, we would follow that process and see where that took us. And now we have the end result.
Right. Now let's talk about those end results. Actually, before we get to that, we should really clarify, because you've talked about this being voluntary. This is not something a company has to do, but why would they want to do it?
Yeah, absolutely. We really like to emphasize that point. This is a voluntary tool, and we think that it can help organizations. First and foremost, we see this as a privacy risk management tool that can help organizations sort of bring privacy into better parity with other types of risks they might be managing at the enterprise level, and in so doing, help them to really build customer trust. The framework can support them in sort of ethical decision making about how to, optimize beneficial uses of data while minimizing adverse consequences for people and even society as a whole. So that's sort of, the heart of the purpose of the framework. But that said, we, absolutely recognize that privacy has evolved in a very regulatory sort of requirements-driven type of environment. And so we do see the framework as also being able to help organizations fulfill their compliance obligations. And by that we mean it's not that using the framework will necessarily make you compliant with any particular law or regulation or standard, but rather that you can use the activities and outcomes in the framework to demonstrate what types of measures you might be meeting to meet your legal obligations. And then that actually leads to what we see as sort of maybe the third key value proposition, is that this tool really can help facilitate communication about privacy risk, privacy practices, both inside the organization, other organizations, customers, and even potentially assessors and regulators.
Okay, it is a noble goal. Let's see how it does it. All right. This is, like you mentioned earlier, modeled on the cybersecurity framework, which I know many of our listeners are at least somewhat familiar with. But there are three big areas. Do you want to kind of broadly go over those three areas, and then we'll dig a little deeper into them?
Sure. So exactly as you said, we've modeled this after the cybersecurity framework. We heard that very clearly from stakeholders as we were developing it. So the key constructs are the core, which is, we call it the core, which really provides sort of an increasingly granular set of activities and outcomes that enable an organizational dialogue about managing privacy risk. The second component is what we call profiles, and that really helps to make sure that the core doesn't become some kind of checklist. So profiles are essentially just an organization's selection of different parts of the core, which is sort of comprised itself of functions, categories, and subcategories. And then these are what the organization prioritizes to help them manage privacy risk. And then the third piece is what we call implementation tiers. We really see that as a set of benchmarks. We use 1 to 4 tiers that help an organization communicate about whether it has sufficient processes and resources in place to manage the privacy risk that it's identified and ultimately achieve its profiles. So, something can do with the profiles is can have sort of this current profile, which is sort of what you're currently doing in terms of privacy and activities and outcomes. And then you can develop a target profile, which is where you want to go and create this kind of action plan. And that's really an important part of that communication piece that allows you to talk to senior management and say, hey, these are the kinds of resources and budget that we're going to need to get to our goals.
Okay, so that's a lot. Let's try to apply this maybe to an example. Let's say that I am a company and I am developing a connected refrigerator because everyone loves internet connected refrigerators. So let's start with a connected refrigerator, which I feel like probably doesn't have as much privacy risk, but let's walk down the process that we're supposed to go through with this.
Sure, absolutely. So one of the things that we did in the framework, we provide sort of a few different ways you could use the framework. And one is we've sort of created this simple ready, set, go model. And so we could use that with this example. So sort of under ready, you start by looking at, what we consider sort of the foundational functions. So there's 5 functions: identify, govern, control, communicate, and protect. And what we found with the cybersecurity framework was that this is sort of part of the increasingly granular concept. You start with these high-level functions, and they're very good for communicating with the C-suite or the board, who are not going to be privacy or cybersecurity experts, and they're not going to want to get down in the weeds of talking about encryption or privacy notices or what have you. But They want to, sort of generally understand, okay, I can understand these 5 simple rules and how we're managing privacy and cybersecurity. So we start with those sort of 5 high-level functions, and identify and govern are what we would consider foundational. Now, we don't look at this as a hierarchy because we think of this as iterative. You can go in at any point. This is meant to not replace anything that you might be doing, any kind of processes you're doing, but really to augment. But let's just say for argument's sake, you really don't have much of a privacy program. Okay, so we'll just sort of start at the beginning. And so you might start with identify and govern because they really are sort of helping with the sort of foundational organizational level practices and activities. Identify really starts with inventory and mapping. You're going to want to understand with your refrigerator what data is being collected and then what happens to that data. So, how do you follow that through the data lifecycle? Is that data being stored somewhere? Is that data being transmitted, disclosed to any other entities? Are you analyzing it in some way, aggregating it, transforming it, and then, how do you ultimately dispose of it?
And by dispose of it, you mean like, I'm going to keep this data for this amount of time and then I'm going to
destroy it. Yeah.
You're just going to delete it from AWS and hope that gets rid of it.
Well, yes, hopefully, and that we have that also in the framework that you have contracts, right, with your service providers, and hopefully you're putting into your contracts the policies and requirements that you need so that, if you send a message, I want this data deleted, then that data should be deleted.
And that's kind of really interesting because in a lot of companies, you might have like an engineer whose responsibility is to make sure like your app works on a mobile device. And a lot of these applications that try to check for quality on a mobile device, they might get a lot of data about the person's device and home address or Wi-Fi address. And that may not be something you want to share with them, but you have to communicate that to the people who are responsible for signing those contracts. That feels daunting.
It is. And, this is where there is a lot of work to be done. I could show you some of the places in the framework where we are encouraging outcomes around, to transmit what we call processing permissions, right? So do not disclose this Wi-Fi router or whatever, or do not commingle this data with that data, right? And so, there's a lot of work to be done going forward. We don't have with the exception of, I think, the most sophisticated companies, it's not widely done and used, that kind of data tagging. So and that's one of the reasons we've actually called that out as a roadmap area. We have a companion roadmap of challenge areas that need more work. So that will be some ongoing collaboration that we do. But I digress slightly.
We'll go back to the fridge. No, that was a useful digression, but let's go back to the fridge.
So we go back to the fridge. So now we sort of understood all the processing about that data, and we've kind of created, hopefully, a nice little illustrative data map so we can see where things are going and who's involved. All that's going to be very important for figuring out your privacy risk assessment, which is because privacy is so contextual, right? If you do nothing with the data, that's going to be one thing. If you suddenly start sharing it with the milk companies who get to say, hey, not only did you forget your milk, but have you tried like our fabulous milk? Right? It's very different set of privacy risks between just simply internal analysis and message about, hey, you forgot your milk. So, and oh, by the way, here's a coupon, right?
Right.
Yeah, and again, that might be very desirable, or it might not. And I think that's the privacy risk management question that needs to be asked. So we go work our way through identify. We really want to understand the business environment, which is just what I was describing. Like, what's your organization's sort of overall business priorities? Is it simply providing a more convenient fridge, or is it, making money with partners, right, on this data? Understanding that is important because you can have the best privacy solution in the world, but it is going to be a barrier or an obstacle to your organization meeting, achieving its business or mission priorities, then no one's going to adopt that solution, right? So we want to find a solution that helps organizations move forward, but also protect privacy at the same time. I will say and now that we're sort of, the next stage is getting to risk assessment. There we've developed a risk model that is really centered around the individual and the kinds of problems that they could experience from the processing of their data. By processing, I mean that full information lifecycle that we talked about. So you can analyze, how is this fridge collecting information? What's it disclosing? Are people likely to feel like, there was some sort of unanticipated revelation, like they didn't realize that data about their milk, usage would be sent to, dairy companies or something, and that would result in coupons. Will people be happy about that, or will they feel embarrassed or, uncomfortable in some way? Those kinds of, risks, and then, analyzing that impact is really part of the risk assessment, which then gets to the final point of sort of figuring out how you're going to respond. And so, you might decide that the risk that people will not like your product outweighs, any potential benefits to your business model, and you might decide to do a different type of processing, right? You're not going to do coupons, or you'll let them choose whether they want coupons or not, or, so that's a sort of a form of mitigation. And so, there's different responses that you can do, but now you've actually had what we called sort of a eyes wide open process, right? That you've walked through, you've identified the risks to the best of your ability. We look at privacy like security. There's no perfect security, no perfect privacy, but you've identified the risks the best that you can, and you've made some decisions that everybody can understand and presumably accept.
And I like that idea of there's no perfect privacy, which is true, but it is very scary to imagine or to see what's happening, which is a lot of data gathering around us, about us, and then it gets shipped to so many different places we have no control over as consumers. So it's nice that basically this is coming in and saying, hey, let's be thoughtful about the data you're collecting, who you're sharing it with, and how that behaves, and what are the repercussions from that. Let's talk about, I want to say how you've succeeded. And this to me sounds like the implementation tiers, because there are 4 different levels there where I think of it like, I am trying, I am on my way, and yeah, I've got a strong program, but you guys call it something else. But can you kind of talk about where that comes from, and maybe should everyone be striving to be like, I have got the goods?
We see this as, again, a type of communication tool, a kind of benchmark that organizations can use to help discuss, do I have sufficient resources and processes in place and to manage my privacy risk? And if not, what do I need? And so, I'll say that in general, we feel that if you are at tier 1, you probably should be at tier 2, but beyond that, it's not sort of the kind of maturity model where there's sort of a relentless march from, 2 to 4. It's really, again, about the types of privacy risks that you need to manage. So depending on your risk, let's take one of the elements of the tiers is workforce. And so at tier 2, we look at sort of workforce as, yes, you might have somebody who, understands privacy risks, sort of, has responsibility for it, but they might wear multiple hats. It might not be the only thing they do. And depending on your type of privacy risk, that might be absolutely fine, or it might not, and maybe you need to move to 3 or 4, where, up at 4, you have a very multi-layered, diverse type of privacy workforce. You probably have somebody up at the senior level, like a chief privacy officer, down through having privacy engineers. Obviously, that's a very different resource allocation for a workforce like that.
Got it. Okay. What is the goal for this framework? Is it stable in time, or do you expect to revisit in 5 years and add, new things to it? I don't know. Like, how do you expect privacy to evolve over the next few years?
So we consider this a living document, again, very similar to the cybersecurity framework. So that's why we call this version 1.0. This is a stable document for the time being. We're going to be focusing in the next year or so on implementation, getting feedback so that we can understand from stakeholders how we might need to evolve it to continue to meet their needs, particularly in a changing policy and technology environment.
Got it. All right. Naomi, I have to ask, having worked on this and understanding where we are, the state of privacy right now, how do you feel about connected devices and your overall privacy right now?
In my own home, I have very, very few connected devices. I'm a very slow adopter. I don't have a lot of, I want to see organizations doing more privacy risk management, doing more innovative types of solutions. You know, one thing that we didn't sort of get into, you know, we sort of were at the basis in the foundational sort of governance structure. Certainly, part of our govern function is identifying your legal requirements, and that's very important. But today, a lot of those legal requirements are focused around, you know, notices that I personally, you know I'm not alone. Even as a privacy expert, I don't have the time to read. And frankly, they don't tell me a whole lot that I really want to know anyway. And so, you know, what I want to see is sort of more innovative solutions. And so what we've tried to put into our sort of control and communicate functions are, you know, more about the kinds of capabilities that you could build in. So we have outcomes like, how do you enable your device to make data processing more visible, right? I'm not going to go to some website to read a long privacy policy about my refrigerator and what it's doing. Maybe it could just tell me, right? And, you know, while it's nagging me about the milk, it could just tell me something, or it just could give me a blinking light or some other type of visual that something's going on with data. You know, I would like to see sort of more of a communication feedback loop, right? So we put in some outcomes around how do you get that feedback? For example, surveys, focus groups to understand your customers' privacy interests more. We know that they will certainly be testing that fridge from a, you know, functionality standpoint with focus groups. Perhaps they could expand that to understand people's privacy interests around that fridge as well. So those are some, I think, the ways that we are trying to give, you know, again, I want to emphasize this is a voluntary tool. And so what we really see is this as a set of outcomes that enable more discussion. So I'd love to see organizations having that conversation internally. How should we design this refrigerator? And then to see that evidence that might induce me to put one of those fridges in my home.
Got it. Well, yes. And I've got to say, the connected fridge does not spark joy, as it were, for me. So, Naomi, thank you so much for coming on the show, for going deep into the privacy framework for us and everything else. Thank you.
Great. Thank you.
That's it for this week. Thanks so much for listening. And remember, if you'd like more IoT news, sign up for my newsletter at stacyoniot.com. We'll see you next week.